Welcome to Trench Diaries. This is Sniper on the Eastern Front, Chapter 12. Something's up with the Romanians. As far as his family knew, Sepp had been on some sort of adventure holiday for the last few months, if the omnipresent propaganda machine was to be believed. "Tell us, how's the war?" they asked. "Boy, you look bad," his mother exclaimed. "Don't they give you enough to eat in the army?" "Let the boy settle down first," said his father, and he set him on the bench behind the kitchen table. "First have a drink, and then we'll get you something to eat." His family was obviously well provided with food, which his father obtained from the local farmers in exchange for carpentry work. Any initial uneasiness anyone may have felt about the family reunion soon faded, but his parents' inquisitive looks remained. But what could he tell them? He just didn't have the words to describe his experiences. They wouldn't understand what it was like out there, and he had no desire to bring the horror of the war into this world of tranquil naivety. A slight nod from his father gave him consent to continue when he started to tell some anecdotes about the daily routine of a soldier. Fascinated, his mother and sisters listened avidly as he described the war as if it was an adventure, exciting, tough, and a bit dangerous, just like young men wished their lives to be. Later, back in his own comfortable bed, the contradiction of lie and truth, of peace and war, wrestled within him. Uncertainty about his future strained at his nerves for hours until he finally succumbed to a restless and all too short sleep. He woke up the next morning still exhausted, his head full of confused thoughts. He sought distraction by helping his father in the workshop and finally found peace by concentrating on his familiar trade. His father didn't ask why he was silent, because he knew the inner tortures his son was going through. To him, it was like yesterday as he remembered his own experience of returning home from the hell of frontline service for a few days, a quarter of a century ago. He had gone to war rejoicing, but had come back subdued and wiser, brutally beaten by the merciless fist of reality. He could remember his feelings when confronted by the peace of home after experiencing the horror of war on the Italian front, his awareness of his family's ignorance of what he had gone through, and his inability to find the words to tell them. Father and son worked on silently in the workshop. Their movements were exact and in almost perfect harmony. There was an understanding between them that needed no words. They both knew about the experiences Sepp had left behind and his inability to confront the future. The inevitability of fate weighed heavily on everyone, but especially for a frontline soldier whose life was reduced to the here and now, knowing that every mission could be his last. This knowledge determined the rhythm of his life. The silence ended when his father looked into Sepp's eyes with a strange melancholy and said, "Take care of yourself, boy, and come back healthy. You're needed here." The days passed and Sepp spent every one of them with his family. The village had become strange to him. His friends and schoolmates had all gone to the front, and many of them had fallen. Now everyone looked to the future with uncertainty and anxiety. The censored newspapers might untiringly express their belief in the Third Reich's ultimate victory, but meanwhile everybody could read between the lines. If they talked about elastic warfare on all fronts, it was clear to everyone that this meant withdrawal. In the meantime, the Western Allies had landed in France and opened a second front that called for so many forces that the army on the Eastern Front no longer received any reinforcements. Simultaneously, the Americans and British were increasing their pressure on the Southern Front in Italy, while the Russians had commenced an offensive against Army Group Center. With pressure on all fronts, it was apparent that the Wehrmacht could not resist much longer. Complete, inescapable defeat was approaching. The attempt by some high-ranking Wehrmacht officers to kill Hitler and negotiate a separate peace failed, and Germany's fate was sealed. Sepp's short leave came to an end. His father's features were set as if in stone as he shook his hand in farewell, but in a short embrace he felt him tremble with emotion. His mother and sisters cried their eyes out and were unable to find any words of encouragement. They were all in the hands of fate. As Sepp's train rolled back towards the front line in Romania in the early days of August, an inexplicable relief welled up inside him that he could go back to living and acting according to the archaic rules of war. While he was on leave, Sepp had sensed unusual contradictions within him. The peace around him was not real. Life at home was characterized by uncertainty and fear of the unknown. At the front, by contrast, he knew what to do, knew his way around, and knew his soldier's trade. With this feeling came the certainty that he was ready to go on, all the way to the bitter end if necessary, with the troop of comrades that had become his home and family. His return to Romania proceeded without incident, but he became aware that all the German soldiers had encountered on the way were anxious and restless. These were the dangerous early signs of demoralization. When he reached the last station, Sepp and 7 traveling companions were given a lift on an Opel Blitz that had been sent by his battalion to collect goods from the train. Sepp knew the driver, a lance corporal named Alois, who had served in Gebirgsjägerregiment 144 for a long time. The closer they got to the front, the stronger Sepp could feel the restlessness around him. Apart from wild latrine rumors, he hadn't heard anything concrete, but Alois put him in the picture. "Sepp, I'll tell you, there's something brewing. When I picked up the old man from the regiment, I heard the officers talking about the message from the reconnaissance people. They think that a big offensive by Ivan is coming, and there's talk about our dear Romanian allies defecting, like the Hungarian Secret Service has reported. The shit has already started for Army Group Center, and our 6th Army is already in a real mess. They're about to be encircled. I tell you, something's going to happen in the next few days. They tear our asses up. There'll not be a dry eye in the place. Here, old boy, life is only bearable if you have some booze inside you." With these words, he got a bottle of fruit schnapps from under his seat. "This is delicious stuff," he said, clicking his tongue. "I've stolen it from the regimental paymaster. That armchair vater got it in a parcel from his wife. Unfortunately, it had a little transport damage, but he'll get over it. There were 2 bottles. Now there's only 1. Sepp gladly took a mouthful and let the delicious, high-proof domestic fuel run down his throat with relish. Their talk meandered for the rest of their ride, punctuated by occasional gulps from the bottle. Alois told Sepp that the past few weeks had been quiet and they'd enjoyed good summer weather. They were also getting on well with the neighboring Romanian unit and had received replacement personnel and supplies that brought Sepp's company nearly back to full fighting strength. When they finally reached 2nd Battalion, Alois asked Sepp if he wanted to visit the Romanians in the evening, since they had a good supply of booze from the local farmers. Sometimes there were even good-looking women. With a bit of talent, charm, and a piece of bread, you can fuck one of them. "First, I've got to see how my people are," said Sepp. "I'll come over as soon as I can." Then Sepp said goodbye and dutifully reported to battalion headquarters. He was welcomed by Captain Kloss with genuine pleasure. "You've come back at just the right time. We can use every good man." Then, with a wink, he added, "Besides, you've probably become a good marksman by going to that grueling course. There's a big push coming. Ivan will try to tear our asses up within the next few days." That shrewd old devil Alois had been right then, thought Sepp. "Something's up with the Romanians as well," Kloss continued. "I think they're about to throw in the towel. The regimental staff officers have received a note from foreign armies east that, according to Hungarian intelligence, there's a Romanian opposition group emerging that wants to come to an arrangement with the Russians. High Command pays little attention to such intelligence, but personally I think there may be something to it. So, do me a favor and keep away from the Romanians. And finally, there's something else." He took a document and a brown paper bag from a pile of papers. "Here's some more tinsel for your breast. Congratulations on being awarded your infantry assault badge." He handed Sepp the certificate and medal, shook his hand, and patted him on the back before turning back to his desk. "Now, take a look around and we talk tomorrow." Sepp took his pack to the quarters of the runner he shared with and then went round the trenches looking for familiar faces. He hardly found any. Then a line from the song Lili Marleen came to his mind. "Tell me where the men are, over the trenches the wind blows." The few remaining old hands seemed out of place among all the young newcomers in whose juvenile faces Sepp believed he could see the shadow of death. He realized that after the next attack half of these new comrades would be missing too. When he met an old Lancer, it was less a case of joy at seeing each other again than a sense of relief and reassurance. They knew that they could rely on each other, which was a priceless feeling in battle. The newcomers, by contrast, had to provide proof of their reliability before they could be depended on. At the end of his rounds, Sepp visited the regimental armorer. His first question was about the young marksman to whom he had passed his Russian rifle. "That guy suffered a very bad end," the staff sergeant reported with a troubled expression. "It's been quite peaceful here for the last few weeks, but there have been a few patrols around. Reconnaissance missions, taking prisoners for interrogation, sometimes a minor setup just to keep the pressure on. The guy got too confident too soon. After a few days he went out alone, hunting and scouting. We don't know exactly what happened. Anyway, he went out in the evening and didn't come back. 4 days later, one of our patrols found his body puffed up like a balloon by the heat. He must have fallen into the hands of a Russian patrol, and the stupid guy had obviously forgotten to get rid of his gun. You can imagine what Ivan does with a German marksman, especially one who has captured a Russian rifle and all those notches in the butt. They tortured him very badly. He'd been beaten savagely and cut with knives. Finally, they'd cut off his nuts and stuffed them into his mouth. But the worst thing was that they'd rammed his gun up his ass, barrel first, right up to the back sides. He must have died in agony. Got back, they were all four setting out and taking revenge right then. Sepp, I tell you, this whole shit is getting too much for us. I don't want to think about what'll happen when Ivan gets into German territory. It's obvious that we've lost this war. All we can do is fight for survival now. Putting his hand on Sepp's shoulder and looking into his eyes, he added, but we'll do it like mountain riflemen should, to the very last cartridge, and after that with our shovels and bare hands. Death was such a daily routine that Sepp was not too shaken by this episode, except by the brutal torture of the captured marksman. But it made him think. He swore never to cut notches into his rifle butt again, and to do everything possible to conceal his identity as a marksman when there was any chance of being caught. The pressure on the Carpathian front was increasing. The commanders of the 3rd Gebirgsjäger Division tried to secure their own sector as well as they could and integrated the neighboring Romanian units into their defensive scheme. The Russian assault started a few days after Sepp's return and steadily increased in intensity. On August 19, 1944, the Russian artillery barrage became a wall of fire that was followed by a concerted attack. The Romanian units in the sector attacked were overrun without putting up any resistance, and Gebirgsjäger Regiment 138 was encircled, though it managed to hold together. The division's few reserves were swiftly thrown in at some strategic risk, and after 4 days of violent fighting, the encirclement around the 138th was broken and the front line was stabilized. Sepp's unit was barely involved in these battles except for skirmishes with Russian patrols. Sepp was out and about almost every night reconnoitering ahead of the German lines, and he often observed small troops of the enemy disappearing amongst the positions held by neighboring Romanian units. Strangely, he never heard any sounds of fighting. His suspicions being aroused that a conspiracy was afoot, he reported his observations to Captain Kloss. "Shit," said Kloss, "so there is something in the rumors. Sepp, now it starts. You see, the Romanians will stab us in the back." In widely misjudged optimism, Army High Command denied that there was any danger of their Romanian allies defecting, despite the reports of commanders at the front. During the summer, German suspicion of the allies had steadily increased as numerous small clues pointed to a change of heart amongst the Romanians. Commanders friendly to the Germans were replaced by others who did not like them, and the flow of Romanian intelligence to the Germans diminished and became contradictory. In addition, the ordinary Romanian soldiers were burnt out and tired of fighting even more than their German counterparts because of their constant very heavy losses fighting on the Eastern Front with insufficient weapons. The approaching Russian attack on their home country was now anticipated with a sense of military impotence. As the Russian offensive against Army Group Ukraine South commenced with the aim of encircling the 6th Army, the two Romanian armies that should have defended their southern flank were beaten inside 24 hours and started a disordered retreat. Since the catastrophe of Stalingrad, the Romanian government had been secretly negotiating with the Soviets for a separate armistice, though this had initially come to nothing because of the severe conditions set by the Russians. In June 1944, the various opposition factions within Romania were reconciled through the involvement of Romanian communists, and a plan was worked out for the overthrow of the Romanian fascist dictator Ion Antonescu and a break with Germany. Realistically assessing the hopelessness of the situation, King Michael of Romania agreed an armistice with the Allies and switched sides on August the 23rd. The same evening, the Romanian army received orders to cease hostilities against the Russians and to turn on the Germans. These orders were acted upon immediately. Contrary to the terms of the new Romanian-Russian pact, the German ambassador and Wehrmacht Supreme Command in Romania were initially advised that the German troops would be given safe conduct out of the country with their weapons and equipment. Hitler, however, rejected any such arrangement and declared a state of war against Romania, another fatal mistake that further endangered 6th Army's precarious position. Within hours, consequently, the Wehrmacht was involved in a war on two fronts that resulted in extraordinary losses in men and material that could not be replaced and utter disruption of their front. By August 30th, Army Group Ukraine South had been almost destroyed. Supreme headquarters in Berlin could follow events by simply moving and removing flags on a map, but the Lancers had to face the music of the Führer's heroic decision on the ground. For the riflemen of the 3rd Gebirgsjäger Division, the fighting situation was complicated. Not only had they two enemies now, but the Romanian people themselves divided into those who supported their government's new alliance with the Russians, the future partisans against the Wehrmacht, and those soldiers and civilians who remained loyal to the Nazi cause and tagged along behind the Germans. This confusion was to lead to a multitude of unfortunate and tragic incidents. August the 23rd itself was a bright summer's day, and there was no real fighting going on in Gebirgsjäger Regiment 144's sector. Even so, the Germans' nerves were on edge because of the depressing situation. At midday, Sepp met Alois, the driver again, who was serving as a regimental runner. "What's up, poacher?" said Alois. "Want a drink tonight? Our Romanians have received some new stuff and invited us over. Don't be shy, come along." Sepp was curious, and a swig was not to be sneezed at, so he agreed. Alois described the place and the way to the Romanian unit and said goodbye through his cab window. "See you tonight at about 8. Don't let them shoot you until then." It was almost 21 hours on this fateful day when Sepp strolled through the forest towards their meeting place with his gun over his shoulder. Although the fighting line was about 2 kilometers away, he was constantly attentive to his surroundings, which had often saved his life. Thus it was that he became aware of a strange background noise shortly before he reached the Romanian positions, which lay beyond the next curve along the track. An incomprehensible and excited babble of voices broke the tranquility of the evening air. Instantly alert, Sepp left the track and disappeared into the undergrowth, doubling back to a little rise from where he hoped to see the Romanian positions. His senses taut, he crept like a cat in the direction of the noises and carefully pushed his way through the thick bushes to the top of the rise. From here, he had a view across a valley as wide as a football field in which the Romanian troops were encamped. About 100 meters away, at a junction of the forest track he had just left, Sepp saw Alois and 4 other lancers through his binoculars, surrounded by Romanians and 2 Russians. The lancers were tied up and about to be interrogated. The Russians were talking to the Romanians, whereupon one of these asked the prisoners some questions. The answers did not seem to satisfy their captors, because one of the Russians pushed the Romanian aside and started to beat the rifleman with a stick. In the meantime, there was a larger group of Romanians looking on, and Sepp could tell by their behavior that they were unhappy about what the Russian was doing. Then an officer appeared and reprimanded the onlookers to no effect before finally pulling out his pistol, whereupon the Romanians shuffled back to their positions, lashed by the tongs of their NCOs. Then the officer talked with the interrogation group and they moved off, apparently to continue their questioning in less exposed surroundings. At the bottom of the slope, right below Sepp's position, there was a latrine. The interrogators and their prisoners went round behind the back wall so that they could no longer be seen from the camp, and this allowed Sepp an even clearer view of them. The distance was about 80 meters. Besides the 5 captives, there were now 2 Russians and 3 Romanians. 1 Romanian was interpreting, the other 2 were there as guards. Once again, the Russians started to hit the rifleman. Amidst the noise of this beating, odd words and phrases reached Sepp's ears, like dirty pig and traitor, and he recognized Alois' voice. Now the Russians began to concentrate their attention on Alois. They beat him harder with their sticks, and then 1 Russian and 1 Romanian started to punch him in the face and stomach so that he fell to the ground doubled up with pain. Then they loosened his bonds and dragged him to the latrine wall, where they pressed his right hand against the beam, and the leading Russian took out his pistol and used it against Alois' fingers like a hammer. Alois screamed in a mixture of rage and pain as his fingertips were beaten one by one to a bloody mush. Sepp was almost overwhelmed by fury and a wild urge to take action, but experience had taught him to control such impulses and to wait for the right moment. A hasty reaction might endanger both his own safety and the lives of his comrades, since there was still a chance that the prisoners might just be marched off into captivity when this was all over. So Sepp calmed himself and continued to watch, though all the time thinking feverishly about how and when he might be able to help his comrades. There was no point in running back to the German positions to form a patrol and take on the entire Romanian detachment. Firstly, because it was improbable that they would recover the prisoners alive. Secondly, because it would cost even more German lives. And thirdly, because the defection of the entire Romanian armed forces was expected imminently. So it seemed to Sepp that there was only one solution. It was up to him. In order to suppress his screams, Alois was gagged. His torturers had clearly believed that seeing his suffering would encourage the other prisoners to provide them with the information they wanted, but questioning them did not bring the results they hoped for, even when the fingertips of Alois' left hand were smashed too. Moaning, he rolled through the dust while his companions were beaten and questioned in turn. Sepp had meanwhile prepared a rest for his carbine and got into firing position. He was ready to shoot, but he still hoped that the Russians would give up torturing their victims and lead them off into captivity. A misguided hope, as it turned out. With sudden amazement, he noticed the Russian with the pistol suddenly tear open Alois' jacket and trousers so that his stomach shone pale and white in the gathering gloom. Suddenly, the Russian pulled a knife from his jacket, opened the blade and waved it threateningly in the faces of the other 4 lancers as they knelt on the ground. He screamed at them, and the interpreting Romanian gesticulated wildly and spoke rapidly before finally shrugging his shoulders in resignation. With that, the Russian turned back to Alois and with a sudden movement cut open his abdominal wall below the navel, thrust his hand into the wound and pulled out about a meter of his intestines. Alois' moan of agony was clearly audible despite his gag. Sepp was used to seeing horrible things in this war, but this utterly sickened him. His heart beat so furiously he thought it would burst, and helpless rage overwhelmed him. The moment to act had come. The Russian's brutality had even shocked the Romanian interpreter, who suddenly got his own pistol out and relieved Alois' suffering by 2 rapid shots to the head. The situation suddenly escalated. Both Russians now had their guns out, and they and the Romanians were threatening and screaming at each other. The Russian torturer waved his pistol at the interpreter and then suddenly turned towards the kneeling prisoners and fired into the first one's face. A spray of blood and tissue exploded from the back of the lancer's head. For seconds, he knelt there like a statue. Then he tipped over sideways onto the legs of his comrades. Sepp had regained his composure in the meantime. Rage had given way to his hunter's instincts. He already had the Russian in his reticle. A short breath, concentration, and then his finger took the pressure point and squeezed. The shot hit the torturer's breast like an iron fist and threw him backwards. Sepp was ready again, even as his first victim hit the ground, and the second Russian fell victim to his next bullet. The Romanian interpreter realized what was happening instantly and leapt over the latrine wall in a single bound. There was a splash of shit as he landed in the well-filled hole. The 2 remaining Romanians filed wildly into the forest without their bullets coming anywhere near Sepp, whose third shot threw one of them against the wall. In the meantime, the whole Romanian camp was abuzz with excitement. Smeared with shit from head to foot, the interpreter ran out of the latrine. The first machine guns were firing into the forest now, their hail of bullets coming dangerously close to Sepp. He could not help the surviving rifleman. He had to escape as quickly as he could in order to warn his comrades. Like a ghost, he disappeared inside the forest. When he reached the Gebirgsjäger positions, there was already hectic activity. He went immediately to Captain Kloss and reported what he had seen in short sentences. Although he left out the details, Kloss could imagine what had happened. "Damn," he hissed, and set about trying to get into radio contact with regimental headquarters and the neighboring units. It turned out that the Romanians had already attacked in some places and had captured 2 of the battalion's detachments. Sepp's report merely provided the final proof that the Romanians were now their enemies. Regimental headquarters was unable to offer any recommendations and could do no more than seek guidance from divisional headquarters. Next, Kloss contacted the 3rd Battalion of Gebirgs Artillery Regiment 112, but immediately after that the radio network was sabotaged. Then each unit was on its own, as had so often been the case during the past few months. But Kloss's battalion was lucky things did not turn out worse. They reacted immediately because they were warned sufficiently early, and every company was put on the alert to defend itself against Romanian encroachments. But many other units suffered badly. The Romanians approached the generally unsuspecting Germans with what appeared to be friendly intentions and then struck murderously. Romanian combat groups coalesced that were similar to partisan groups led by infiltrated Russian agents. Acting with extreme harshness and brutality, these spread panic among the German units who were unable to tell friend from foe. While other units had to take bitter losses, the riflemen of the 2nd Battalion of Gebirgsjäger Regiment 144 defended themselves with grim determination. When groups of Romanians approached their positions with the usual familiarity, but their weapons handy, the forewarned riflemen fired at their first suspicious movement, though such situations became a whole lot trickier when they took place at night. Fortunately, the Romanians had no heavy weapons, and the superior firepower of the riflemen gave them the edge when it came to firefights. And so it was that Gebirgsjäger Regiment 144 became the 3rd Gebirgsjäger Division's center of resistance and the rallying point for its tactical and strategic reorganization. Survivors of the division's other shattered elements fought their way to the 144th and provided the necessary reinforcements to mount counterstrikes to rescue other surrounded units. By the next morning, assault groups had already been put together and were advancing against the Romanians. Filled with rage and indignation at their betrayal and seeking revenge for the Romanians' violence towards their former allies, the riflemen stormed into them like berserkers. The German counterattacks were savage and took no prisoners since the necessary logistical support had been destroyed. Sepp served as an ordinary rifleman during this confused fighting since his marksman's rifle would just have got in the way. Instead, he fought with a self-loading rifle Model 43 that he'd obtained on his return from leave, though he'd had to watch it like a hawk to make sure no one pilfered it. At distances up to about 100 meters and loaded with explosive bullets, this had considerable striking power. Within a few days, the division had managed to drive the Romanians from its sector and to stabilize its position, but it was quite alone. During the same period, 6th Army was almost completely destroyed. At the same time, the Russians stormed Bucharest and the southern oil fields of Ploesti. This left the 3rd Gebirgsjäger Division's positions projecting into the Russian front like a thorn. Consequently, the Russians attacked them next, following their success against the 6th Army in the north. On August the 27th, the intensity of the Soviet attacks increased beyond their usual skirmishes and became a major offensive against all the Carpathian passes that the division held. 2nd Battalion had a special importance in these battles because it was utilized as a sort of fire brigade, being thrown in whenever the need was greatest. Its riflemen were able to repel the enemy again and again because they were fighting over terrain they had come to know well, and being in their element as trained mountain troops, they enjoyed a clear tactical advantage over the Russians. Yet, though they fought with all their might, the vortex of events around them was spinning faster and faster, and gradually it sucked them in. The regimental histories might have unemotionally and rationally recorded these battles in tones of bombastic optimism. General Klatt, for instance, wrote, "In the virgin Carpathians the riflemen felt strong and free, in harmony with the mountains. If the time really had come for all hell to break loose, then why should fate not dictate that they die right there?" But reality was more unpleasant. The Gebirgstruppen didn't die in a painted sunset to the sound of music in the spicy mountain air and by a clean shot through the heart and a sudden death. No, death was always dirty, stinking, and tore bodies to twitching, blood-spattered shreds of flesh. Every day could be a soldier's last, and the fear of death, mutilation, and the uncertainty of Russian imprisonment consumed everyone. But they either learned to live with the insanity or they were dead within a few days. And despite everything, they continued to hope. The Eastern Front was by now devouring up to 40 Lancers a day, a casualty rate that Germany could no longer sustain. The army's logistics had already failed as early as the winter of 1941 to 1942, and by the autumn of 1944 they were no more than makeshift. Again and again the riflemen had to give up captured territory simply because their supplies failed. Even their medical supplies were increasingly interrupted by the constant fluctuations of the front line, and organized evacuation of the wounded was often impossible. A serious wound at the front was virtually a death sentence. The war is in its final stages, and today we have learned about the Romanian turncoats. A lot of things have been written about this, and today we got to witness the brutality of this from a first-hand account. It's hard to imagine what that must have been like, being friends one minute and then bitter enemies the next. You know how the saying goes: if you locked me in a room with an enemy soldier and a traitor, and hand me a pistol with 2 cartridges, I'd shoot the traitor twice. Absolutely honorless behavior. Anyway, the sniper training film is still playing, this time it's part 2. Check the whole thing out if you like, it's really interesting. So, thank you for watching, consider subscribing, cheers and bye bye.